Welcome back to the Following Your Gut podcast, where health science meets clinical wisdom. As always, I'm your host, Roland. It's great to be with you again today. And I want to ask you guys something. Has there ever been an inkling, an interest in Eastern medicine, or you've heard things that don't sound at all familiar, logical, or easily understood, but you've had a knowing, an intuition that there's something more that you'd like to dive into, but you don't know where to start? That was me many years ago, and it's overtaken me to the point where it's become a dominant worldview of mine when it is dealing with health of myself and other people. And today I have an amazing guest. His name is Jeff, so it's already a good omen because he's like the fifth one who's been on the podcast. But I have Dr. Jeff Essen. He's also a Minnesota native, and he is one of the foremost experts as a naturopathic doctor on Eastern practices being merged with Western philosophy and perspective. So, Dr. Jeff, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Roland, as always. The idea of talking about this is sort of a fun play thing for me because it's how I have to practice every day, but this is a little bit more of the intellectual side of things.
Well, we like intellectual things on this podcast, and play, if we can interject it, is also fun. Before we get into the topic at hand, I'd love to know a little bit more about your story and your background.
Sure. About 27 years ago, I was practicing massage. I was loosening people up for chiropractic adjustments, and I was oh so happy, and I could listen to Enya all day, and everything was stress-free. And then a car accident happened that would not allow me to continue to do massage, and so one of the chiropractors I was working with, suggested to become a naturopath, which at that point I had never heard that term. I then checked it out, dove right in, leapt off the cliff, and had no idea what I was doing, and ended up getting my naturopathic degree, and I've been doing nothing ever since. I've just been completely immersed in the idea of the naturopathic philosophy, and on a day-to-day basis, bringing that to my patient care.
I'm going to make an Enya joke, and you might be surprised that I have one, but I'm going to say that that massage therapy profession just sailed away for something better.
Ooh, yeah, good one. Yeah.
Ooh, just brought back the childhood Sunday nights of Enya playing in my house in Canada. So you have been someone who, I guess, was called into duty, so to speak, in terms of how your profession developed. But you yourself are not, as I would see it, a typical naturopath. You've expanded your philosophy and your perspectives, almost kind of merging some maybe ideations of massage therapy, because a lot of massage is not based just in anatomy and physiology. There's
Hmm.
different traditions, long held traditional approaches to massage that are unique around the world. What is it that made you blend some of the health and science of naturopathic medicine with an Eastern philosophy? What drew you in there?
Well, even as just, I shouldn't say just a massage therapist, as a massage therapist, I was still a little bit restricted by the boundaries of practice, let's say, and had huge amounts of interest in other things concerning it. And, in the massage world, there are what I call the woo-woo people. The people are kind of way off in the la la land as far as energy medicine and everything else. And this is all Reiki and all this other kinds of things that doesn't have as much of a foundation in Western science. And then there's the people who are, getting down to the very, tendon that's sore, and they're, doing all this kinesiology to try to. I was interested in both worlds. Both things fascinated me equally. But I always wondered about, well, then what was the joining of those two things? How did those two things merge together? And that's where I gained my interest in then one thing leading to another of, well, if this energetic description from, say, an Eastern point of view has its language, and then the Western point of view has its more medical language applied to it, aren't they just saying the same thing? And I began to realize that. So then as I walked down that road, I discovered that there's so much of the entire world's worth of information. Why are we limiting ourselves to just our local, you know, why would I only want one thing when I can have 10?
It's a wonderful perspective. And I think a lot of people who may be a little hesitant in the regards of wanting to dive into the Eastern approach is because it's overwhelming. The Western system has a nice linear progression through
Mm.
learning anatomy, physiology, then you learn biochemistry, and then you learn the practical applications of such, depending upon the route you choose. Eastern is more like here's everything all at once. There's not the same linear scaffolding of understanding. So I think a lot of people may turn their nose up at it just from a perspective of it seems like such a bear to take on and become an owner of the information and a steward, in addition to maintaining the Western philosophy. When people ask you, where do I start? Where do you generally point them in the direction of when it comes to getting a grounding in Eastern medicine?
Actually, I point him to somebody from the Western point of view, Dr. James Oschman. Oschman. Brilliant physio guy. He's into physics. This guy understood from a physics point of view how the body worked. And by virtue of examination of how the electrical, I call it electrical, which isn't exactly accurate, but in taking a look at the message sending systems that the body has, inevitably, this led him to, well, gee, Western medicine has our electrical, we can measure it in AC and DC and voltage and all this. Guess what? Somebody else described this 5,000 years ago, and it's just a different language that they use. So Oshman was brilliant at trying to merge those two worlds together. I had the privilege in naturopathic school of having dinner at a large table of students and our teacher with James Oshman, just in casual conversation. Brilliant man. I would say he kind of started me down that road of trying to blend those two worlds.
So if he is kind of the ideation point of seeing the connection between those two, and I'm assuming he has a book, a resource that you can reference in terms of where you got his information.
Yeah, in my course that I teach for the naturopathic school, his energy medicine is one of the textbooks that I refer the students to, based a huge chunk of the information based on his research studies, videos, and then again, you move into somebody like Ted Kapchuk, who's again a Westerner who went to China and dove in deeply into the traditional Chinese medicine, not only methodology, but also philosophy. And this is where, again, a Westerner who doesn't grow up with a certain language of context and understanding of something can still look at this and say, well, like an anthropologist studying a tribe that nobody's visited before, have a different viewpoint than the people who are living it, but still maybe better understand it from a different point of view, the anthropological view. And so that's where, there's these people who are trying to bridge those worlds and be interpreters of the language that I think then once we would better understand that, and cross the cultures and interpret the language, they're all saying the same thing. Everyone's saying the same thing over and over again, just in their own language and way.
Well, there's an old saying, nothing new under the sun, right? It's just a rehashing
Yeah.
of information. And I'm not going to even attempt to spell his name because I'll butcher it, but it's Dr. Pishinger. He wrote the book The Ground Matrix, I believe.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's
Yep.
one that really helped me because it 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 helped me square away the unknown intangibles of things that didn't quite make sense with what a meridian is. And it actually gave a context of understanding and a description of something that you assume, an acupuncturist just puts a needle in, or you go to a physio and they just stimulate a certain thing. It's really a fiber optic cable network in the body of electrically different in terms of its measurement points of contact on the body that connect those energetic lines to the different organs, and there's a relationship. So it really was the same kind of understanding for me, where someone of the West described something of the East, so my bias could get into it, and then it dropped my resistances of saying, well, because I don't understand, therefore there's nothing else to explore here. Then it opened up the Pandora's box of, oh, there's a lot to explore here. So from that point, what you just said with those two references, you had the connection of the East and the West through a Western mind. Where did you go next, or where do you encourage people to go next to better understand things? Is it going to a meridian, or is it going to a chakra, or is it going to understanding frequency and vibration?
Well, if you indulge me, I could tell a brief little historical anecdote here that really kind of puts an emphasis on how many people have attempted this. Um, World War II happened. In World War II, there was the Axis powers, and that was Italy, Germany, very Western minded, and it also included Japan. Now, oddly enough, one of the medical doctors who was working for the Nazi regime in Germany um, then when the war ended, he said, well, hey, we've been experimenting with all these things, and I've been studying bioelectricity. When I studied bioelectricity, I was sent to Japan to study these meridians. And they actually did cadaver, dissections. They found out that the meridian pathways, as laid out by the Japanese practitioners, sure enough, had different electrical conductivity than those tissues surrounding. There was then also a matchup in terms of at that point, 1943, 44, when Dr. Voll was there, was able to then make a device that would measure the voltage on the circuit. Now that was the progenitor of what we know as the electroacupuncture according to Voll EAV, meridian stress analysis, electrodermal screening. That's all the same thing, just different names. But effectively speaking, all we're doing is measuring the electrical conductivity and voltage change on a electrical circuit using an ohm meter. And that's really all that electrodermal screening really is measuring that. So you had somebody as Western, logical, left-brained as possible, a German Nazi doctor, going over to study the esoteric sciences in Japan, where they're studying all this, again, different language, different context, more of an art form in Japan, in their system, and yet they blended beautifully and are still existent now today as a major branch of evaluation for the body.
And it's
Now,
incredible
effectively
because, oh,
speaking,
sorry, you were, I, there was a little
I,
pause there.
I
Keep
was just
going.
going to say, because as Voll described it, this is nothing more than a feedback loop. And so in his study of bioelectricity, he was studying why does the body have all this electricity running through it? What's the purpose of it? Now, what ended up happening when he made these discoveries in Japan was that he understood that the energy went out from a central source, the brain, out to different organs and glands via pathways. Again, these electrical conductive pathways. You called it the fiber optic communication network. Indeed, it is. So as these messages went out, there are instructions for the body to perform tasks. It's a brain regulation and stimulation of body function. Now, as is with every electrical circuit, and this is where his knowledge of electricity came into play, you can't just send electricity out and then it just ends. There has to be a loop where it goes back. There's always a feedback. So what he discovered then is that the Schwann cells on the outside of the nervous system were then running electricity the opposite direction. So there's what we have as a return circuit of information. This is the organs, glands, tissues that the original message went out to, now giving a feedback of here's our status. Here is the needs that we may have. So now here comes this electricity running the outside of the nerve up to the tailbone, where it gathers into what's known as then the governing vessel, which we would know as our spinal cord. That message runs up to C1 and then goes into the jaw and teeth. Now, every tooth is connected to an acupuncture meridian. So a tooth becomes a note played by an orchestra. Your jawbone is then the harmonic resonance board, or a sound board like you'd have in the bottom of a piano, that generates the entire teeth. All the teeth individually contribute each note, and then that's a harmonic that's then broadcast into the brain, so the brain understands what is the harmonic and specific notes coming from the body. So this is our feedback loop. Our brain sends messages to our body sends feedback back to the brain, and everybody's in constant communication. And effectively, it's all music. So this music has a mathematics to it. The music can be broken down to be a Western science, here's the numbers kind of thing. But also as music is, it's an art form. So there's a physics to it. There's also an art to it that are both overlaid with one another depending on your point of view.
Well, that's kind of that's a wonderful thing that you just said because it gives justification to why I always introduce this podcast saying where health science meets clinical wisdom, because there's an art and science to patient care, there's an art and science to client practice, and that pattern fractally exists on all aspects, I think, of this industry, if it's what you're into. Because eventually you go so deep into things, you can't know the one thing anymore. You just see where it fits into the bigger picture. So it's not focusing on the single note that you're choosing, it's actually examining the symphony and how that note relates to the symphony. So if I back up from your the start of your story, basically what you said is there was a gentleman who was very Western minded, sent to the East. They cross-referenced, they matched up what was being said in different language, but describing the same things. And now this has kind of been the catalyst to allow you to develop your own philosophical framework and understanding about how all of these things are interrelated and how they fit together. So let me pose you this question then. I'm someone who knows a lot about biochemistry. I'm someone who knows a lot about functional lab testing, a lot about organs and organ pathology. How do I use this Eastern medicine, this Eastern understanding to make me a better practitioner with what I just said as an aforementioned skill set?
So one of the courses I also teach in a naturopathic school is the blood test evaluation. And so in describing each individual biomarker that's measured in blood, we understand that that is one thing, but one of the things that has to be done when describing these things in class is, well, here's this one number, but it relates to other numbers. So if you have hemoglobin as one measurement, well, you have to also relate that to the MCHC and the MPV, and there's about eight or other markers that you'd say, well, the hemoglobin may be a number, and it may be probably the most important of those numbers where you're considering anemia. You don't want to draw a conclusion based on the hemoglobin alone. You have to have correlating things that then would say, here's an overall larger picture view or a multiple angle point of view on the same subject that then is a better confirmation of how we feel about any given status of the body. If you expand that to all different versions of evaluation, you don't want to go, jump off the cliff of any one thing without being able to relate it to all things of the body. And so very often when I'm seeing a patient, I'll have numerous different things popping up. There's, masses of amounts of information. What I'm looking for is what is the connection between those things and what is the repetition. Connection and repetition are how you become a good practitioner. Don't go based on any one score, go based on the cumulative mass that seems to head in a direction and have a concurrent theme to it. So if I see somebody and their hormones are what they complained about, come in and my hormones are just completely out of whack, whichever hormone you want to name. And then when you're testing, there's all these things about intestinal bacteria and SIBO and lack of probiotic microculture, and all these things saying digestion is really your problem. Well, guess what? The small intestine and the hormones are in the same electrical circuits combination called the fire element of, Chinese medicine. And so if I'm saying that there's a bunch of physiological problems in the digestion and we can measure hormones as being off balance, there may be an energetic relationship between them that's better described by Chinese medicine than it would be by Western medicine. So integrating all of it together is the ultimate tool to be able to grab things from this place, and this place, and put them together as a larger picture. Remember, in naturopathic medicine, one of the second edict of natural medicine is treat the whole person. We can't reduce a person down to a number.
Which is what's been, I don't want to say happening, but there's definitely a push in narrative might not be the right way to describe it, but there's an intention to adapt Western medicine reductionism with testing and various things to take the sum of the person's test results and make that the picture of the absolute of everything that that person is. And I always say it's a moment in time, it's a snapshot, and it gives you patterns. And that might be a fun thing to explore really quickly here with you, because if you mention hormones, the average person who is on the Western medical side of practice will give the person the hormones that their body is deficient in. For example, they'll do endocrine balancing, TRT, hormone replacement therapy, what have you. But I'm going to gather that that is not the approach that would be framed on the Eastern side. So maybe you can explain how the Eastern philosophy would take a Western problem and rather than just bolster up the weaknesses and fill in the gaps, what would that approach be and what would it look like?
Oh, certainly, yeah. Where hormones are concerned, from the Eastern point of view, you're looking at they divided up into three different sections: TH1, 2, and 3. So TH1 would be the adrenals and gonads, either ovaries or testicles. We have the TH2, which is the thyroid and thymus. TH3, which is the pituitary pineal. Now, when we understand each one of those three different segments has its own relationship and own emotional set, own reactivity set, that each of them are in different places as far as what is I mean, remember that hormone, the word hormone means messenger.
Mhm. And when you say T8, we're not talking about
No,
immune Th1,
not,
Th2
so yeah,
responses.
it's not that.
So this is the triple warmer
Triple
that's
heater,
referred
triple
to,
warmer.
triple
Yeah.
heater. Okay.
So yeah, that's their terminology for it because our hormones give us inner heat in that
Mm.
model. And so therefore triple warmer, triple heater is their terminology. So TH1, yeah, refers to that. Now, but the point of it is that when you're talking about the adrenals and gonads, that is our most basic foundational survival mechanisms. Survival and reproduction are what TH1 is all about. The TH2 is more regulatory systems, which is the thymus, producer of antibodies, the thyroid, producer of the metabolism stimulation, and even the parathyroid, which is relative to our ability to incorporate nutrients into our cells, especially calcium into bones. Now, the TH3, though, is all about regulation and response to the environment and direction of the rest of the body. Now, that may go into higher realms of, what you consider to be survival is adrenal, but what you consider to be adaptation would be more pituitary.
Mm.
So you have different purposes and needs for even each of these divisions of the hormonal system. So just to say that one is off is a complete misnomer. There's no such thing as any one hormone that operates independently of any of the others.
They are
Um,
networked,
yeah,
always.
well, it's actually a three-dimensional ball. You're trying to if you move the bottom of the ball to the top, well, and then you displace the top down to the bottom. So what's going to happen is that then as you put one additional hormone in that was lacking, you're going to off balance another one as well. And so, realistically speaking, every adjustment that is made to hormones has to go through a negative feedback loop mechanism. And this is the very Western point of view on it, is there is a negative feedback loop. For every hormonal need, the cells produce a messenger protein that says, hey, can you please give us more down here? Or maybe less. There's a regulatory peptide that goes from the cells to the hypothalamus of the brain, which then turns around using that negative feedback stimulus to then measure what there is in the bloodstream, say, oh, gee, I guess we are low in that. Let's produce a hormone to stimulate the gland that's then responsible for the production of that hormone. There's no such thing as a single just glandular just plopping stuff out. All of these glands have a stimulus response mechanism. And all that is to regulate how much hormone messaging we're doing because over messaging is as much of a problem as under messaging. And so if one says that, then blood sugar is out of control. Blood sugar is completely out of whack, and there's a constant stimulation for more insulin production to bring blood sugar down. That's going to imbalance the adrenals, which will in turn imbalance the reproductive hormones, which may in turn affect the thyroid. So to simply say you're low in this, here, take more, there's no possible way to balance that. And to throw a little bit of a negative attitude towards this, measurement of hormones in the blood is highly inaccurate because we're measuring only those hormones that are globulin bound. What does that mean? That means these are hormones that, well, first of all, when they take the blood, they spin it out, meaning that the red blood cell portion goes to the top and the serum goes to the bottom. They actually throw the red blood cell portion out once they've measured it. They measure the hormones that are in the serum. These are globulin bound or bound for excretion.
They're
So
not able
my
to be used.
yeah, my analogy for this is you're going to shove a sensor up the tailpipe to see how much gas you have in your tank. it's a related thing. It's not exactly accurate. And so even just measurement of hormones via blood is questionable in and of itself. But then again, like you said, this is a snapshot of a moment in time when, what time of day was it? What did you eat? Where was your blood sugar? Where was your stress? Can all determine whether or not that hormone was in an amount or not. If you wanted to measure hormones in blood, you have to measure the whole blood, what's called free fraction. It's extremely expensive. You're never going to get your insurance company to pay for it. You're never going to get a script from a doctor to do it. And then in addition to that, you'd have to measure about 4 to 6 times a day over the course of an entire week to understand where is your hormone on average and what is it responsive to. And it's just not practical. So one measurement of any one hormone in a blood test is, maybe a 20% chance that it's accurate.
And that is due to the fact that there's a natural fluctuation and a cycle of production levels being volatile. And this is why I have always aligned with, and the longer I practice, the less I rely upon objective diagnostics to be a measure of anything other than that context of that person in a moment in time. And if you base your entirety of decision making process on it, unfortunately, it's going to the casino and betting on black. May happen, but it also may be absolutely nothing for you.
Yeah.
So then in that context, what you're saying is the Western side of giving what's deficient is actually going to create a potential negative feedback problem. Is that the same reason why someone who has been on, say, testosterone replacement for years, when they go off, their body doesn't make any. So the body has to somehow become educated and stimulated again to start making its own, or else there's long-term detriment to that person's balance.
Yeah, that's correct with a lot of different versions of there's a lot of people out there on thyroid replacement therapy. They've had thyroid cancer, they've had thyroid nodules or hypothyroidism, and they'll give them a replacement therapy. Over time, just like a muscle, if you don't use it, it's going to atrophy. The glands will also atrophy, but also the feedback loop, like you said, that there's hormone adjusting peptides within the brain, the pituitary hypothalamus, that will then say, because it's being supplied from the outside source, we constantly perceive that there's adequate amounts in the system. Therefore, we are not going to send out the stimulatory hormones to engage that to be made by the gland. Now, from let's just say an autoimmune source, somebody has hyperthyroidism, sometimes known as Graves' disease. Now, in that case, you might be saving that person's life by supplying that artificial source because their own gland is no longer manufacturing, it's no longer a target for autoimmune attack. There's a certain strategy to that's not a bad idea, right? That can be life-saving. But the problem in, say, testosterone therapy, like you mentioned, is that means that now the testicles will shrink, they'll atrophy, and then they lack also the communication pathway with the hypothalamus to produce FSH and LH to stimulate production on their own. It would take a considerable amount of time to re-engage the communication system, much less than regrow the testicles to be able to produce adequate hormone.
And there seems to be a hierarchy to that communication that is considered by the East in a way it's not considered by the West. So let's go back to that original proposal to you. How does the East identify, rationalize, and intervene with hormone problems?
Well, again, the TH1, 2, 3 thing, let's just say this is testosterone replacement therapy, using this as an example. The TH1 would be relative to the battery of storage of energy called the lower dantian. This lower dantian is where, if you are properly managed, this is where all your energy goes once it's manufactured to be then used according to its need distributions. In other words, this is a battery that's going to take care of survival first and reproduction first. So now, with proper energy stored there in that lower dantian, which is often breathing exercises can really load that up. That's why they show the Buddha with the big belly. That's not fat, that's his energy
He
storage.
wasn't a food addict. He wasn't a
Right,
diabetic. You're
right, yeah.
saying he was actually just storing lots of energy.
Right, exactly. So in that case now, what you need to tap into is the energetic relationship of the storage of energy battery, the lower dantian, to route that then to the testicles in order to, kind of fortify the communication of, hey, we're really important here. We're going to drive more energy through this. And by driving more energy through it, it then creates a greater stimulus now in the regulatory glands of the pituitary pineal hypothalamus. So you kind of have to draw. Is it a push or is it a pull? Well, it's actually both. In other words, you push energy through one channel, you pull it through another channel, and now you get this circulating energy that then ups its ampage. It gets higher voltage. It has a more sort of urgent pathway. And then that can then drive the physiological, nutritional, metabolic, chemical structures of the body to follow the energy that's being driven through. To try to simply pump chemistry into the body and make this happen, it'll have a very slow, unspecific response.
Okay, so when you say pump energy through, move, are we talking breath work? Are we talking the use of specific supplements? Are we talking exercise practices? I want to make it, if we can, as practical as possible to take out any ambiguity from strategies and aspects of execution.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and from the chemical point of view, what you're doing is you're putting in resources that would fortify hormones. So fats are a big chunk of that. All hormones are based on a molecule of fat, usually cholesterol. Making sure that the liver is good at the enzymatic breakdown of the mother hormones like pregnenolone and androstenedione. You want to have all the resources there that would be blood sugar managing. There's no such thing as a balanced hormone with blood sugar out of balance. Um, Stress would be the same thing. Can we use adaptogens to modify stress responses? Even just basic things like for the pituitary, manganese is a trace mineral that's very often in short supply in our food. So manganese shortages, manganese malnutrition can mean you simply can't produce a hormone of stimulation. Now, all of that then is more the biochemical Western point of view. You pump a bunch of nutrients and raw material into the system, but it is undirected unless you do something like breathing exercises, which is probably the primary and probably the most important and oldest system of medicine in the world. Is that breath work drives the energy down to the dantian, which again, the lower dantian will, as the major energy source and battery of the body, will drive the energy through the system. Now, again, concentrated meditation where we're working with the pituitary pineal gland, then also would then have the opposite pole. I mean, everything has polarity, everything has rhythm, everything has vibration. So if we're talking about the lower energy centers of the body, we want to pair that with a corresponding, energy of the upper center of the body. So we have let's just say a negative polarity in the top, a positive polarity in the bottom, that will then lead to a discharge of energy and a circulation between those two. It's an electrical circuit. It's always a feedback loop. Everything in our body is a feedback loop, chemically and energetically.
What would some of those breathing exercises look like to engage the feedback loop communication within the body and also to potentially bring energy into areas that are the initiation site of restoring balance?
Well, I mean, there's literally unlimited levels of how one can participate.
But
Um,
maybe some very basic
yeah,
introductory things. Maybe
Uh,
people can try this at the end of this episode if they
yeah,
follow the
certainly.
steps.
The easiest one is what's called the square breath, which means that you're going to inhale through your nose down to your belly button. You need to breathe way down into the system. You can't just breathe into your upper lungs. That's very poor breathing practice. So you want to do what's called the deep diaphragmatic breath, expand your belly muscles, pull that air way down. You're going to count in for four of an in breath through your nose. Then you're going to hold that breath for for a count of four. Then you're going to breathe it out through the mouth through a count of four, and then again, hold the breath for 4 seconds. So that's the most basic fundamental and has been proven to be very effective at stress reduction. There's many, many other breath works. If I'm going to want to, though, engage, say, my lower dantian, I'm going to actually focus on breathing all the way down to, as a male, you'd breathe into your testicles. As a woman, you'd breathe into your ovaries. Now, this is a visualization exercise. I mean, you're literally not breathing the air in there, but you are trying to visualize, I'm breathing so low it's going to hit my ankles.
It's intentional.
Yeah, I mean, it literally is the idea that your creative mind is going to drive the energy of that breath down farther than the actual physical breath can go.
Mm.
And then at that point, I'm also going to breathe out in such a way that I'm going to do it in two exhalations. A short one and a second one that's much stronger. Now, that stronger one is something that sort of breaks through barriers, opens doors that were shut. So a mild breath out followed by a very strong rest of the breath output is a more invigorating, more stimulatory kind of breath as an exhale. So that, again, there's quite limited, unlimited numbers of breathing techniques. I'm learning new ones all the time. There's plenty of them. Some of them would be the what's called the little death exercise of breathing in, holding it, and while holding, you nasal pant. Now, while you're nasal panting, this mimics a hyperventilation that would be a stressful thing to the body. Now you're purposely inducing stress. Why would you do that? Because now your body has to respond and adapt and survive. Now, then after that, you're going to hold. You're going to breathe out all the breath you have. You're going to have empty lungs completely. And now you're going to hold. And while you do that, you're going to do effectively what people call a Kegel exercise, or that contraction of that space between the anus and the genitals of whichever type you have. Now, in that case, now you are pulling energy up into the system of a system that's desperately crying out for air. Now you're going to pull energy in instead. Now that energy goes into that lower dantian. Now that's going to really build a massive battery full of energy for you to do. And then you're going to breathe out and you're going to do a nice deep breath in again. 3 deep breaths, then you do the nasal panting again. And it's a repetitious cycle of threes that when you do that little death, you are literally causing the body to respond to, I'm drowning. I'm not able to breathe and I'm going to do everything I can do to survive. You think that doesn't jazz up a system? Now your hormones are going to respond and say, wow, I can now build energy while while in this breathing cycle that mimics death. Now I'm going to actually die in order to be reborn in more energy. There's just, and there's dozens of them out there of all kinds of breathing exercises. I think that would be a course in and of itself.
Thank you for walking us through that, just because, again, to the Western mind, for the Western person, these are novel concepts, but practiced regularly, they do induce a catalyzation effect of something that is really close to my heart as a philosophy, and that's the body is what restores balance to itself. So rather than forcibly put things in or try to flush things out, which there is obviously a place for given circumstances, but what you're trying to do with these strategies, in addition to some other things, is stimulate the body's own homeostasis from a place of being out of balance, allostasis. And then when the body is able to regulate itself on those three levels, then coherence, as I describe it, or harmony within the physiology is restored. And ideally, the experience of the symptoms that that person is presenting that may be connecting to their hormone irregularities or abnormalities starts to evaporate away and the person finds themselves in a better state of health. I think that's just remarkably cool as a perspective, but it also comes back to where I think functional medicine is going, or alternative medicine, whatever term you want to call it. I don't like, it's just healthcare and practice. Is that we realize that you're not going to get people better by hyper focusing on small little things. You have to consider the whole person. So to think that breathing can regulate the hormones as chemical messengers is a novel and amazing idea. And it also opens up an avenue that I want to ask you about in my mind, because those are non-physical things affecting physical things that we can experience. The movement of air in and out of the body, the direction of intention of where you're moving that energy in the body has a physiologic effect. You mentioned the idea that things vibrate in life. What about aspects of modern life that may be destabilizing us? Things like electromagnetic fields, artificial light. Again, this is not necessarily an Eastern versus Western thing. There's aspects that can be parsed out here. But how do you relate to the concept of vibration as it pertains to health?
Well, everything in medicine seems to be this sort of it's a range from A to B that there's a certain range, there's a certain part of that that's very good for you. In other words, The frequency of the Earth, that was called the Schumann resonance, is 7.82, 7.83. It varies a little bit. That is the native frequency that you were born into when you came out of your mother, and you adapted to say that this is my baseline. Here is the constant through which I can then base everything else as a variable. Now, that frequency, our body is innately attuned to, and when we experience it, this is extremely beneficial and grounding for us. Now, that's a 7.82 hertz. That's relatively low. In other words, 7.82 times per second, you get an up and down wave. As comparison to, say, for instance, 5G, which is 5 billion hertz. In
So
other
that
words, that's
means in 1 second, it alternates 5 billion times.
correct.
I think people understand what a Hertzian frequency is. It's cycles per second.
Correct. Yeah.
It hits the
And
top
so
and
this
bottom of that wave
up and away.
that many
And so
times a
the up, yeah,
second.
they measure the up and down, and then the amplitude is how high it goes up and down. But that's point about it is we are made for a certain set. Our bodies, our systems, our cells, everything about us is made for a certain range of those things that are beneficial. Slightly below the 7.82 and significant, a little ways away. So 20 to 2000 I'm sorry, 20 to 20,000 is our range of hearing, for example. Those things are beneficial to us because we're sort of given a blueprint pattern of these things are okay. They may be variables, but they're okay. Once we go beyond those, this is where we induce harm. So a good example is infrared and ultraviolet. So infrared can be very beneficial to us for a short period of time to warm ourselves up. There's all kinds of these infrared red light, you can have a pad or you can have a, face mask or whatever it is, and it stimulates more circulation. But increase the voltage of that infrared and suddenly you're burning yourself as opposed to ultraviolet. Again, ultraviolet can be enormously beneficial for somebody, stimulating, for example, vitamin D production in the skin. But at some point, when it's too intense or for too long a period of time, it can also cause free radical damage to those same skin cells. So everything has this context of here it is within range and it's beneficial and it's variable, and we have to live with variability. There's always change. There's always a pulse and a rhythm to everything that happens, but it has to be within a certain range. Now, again, you take this 5 billion. What is the body? The body literally doesn't even have a context to what that is. The electrical reception antenna that you are doesn't have a concept of identification of what is 5 billion. So it has to be something foreign, abnormal, out of context to our body's health. And so the body will say, I'm going to do my best job I can to react to this. And what happens is the amygdala area of the brain. This is the area of the brain that is our emergency response.
The
If you,
lizard brain, if you will.
yeah, I mean, if you hear a noise coming at you from the right side, you will automatically look to the right. Why do you automatically look to the right? That's for your survival. You're trying to get out of the way of something coming at you. And those people who didn't respond like that aren't your ancestors because they didn't survive, right? So we have we have this idea that then if you are experiencing 5G, that 5 billion is making the amygdala constantly look over there, look over there, look over there, look over there. Now, that kind of emergency response is not good over a long term. A one-time incident, it might save your life. 24 hours a day, this is extremely detrimental. And I give the metaphor of, can you run a hospital only out of the emergency room? Eventually, that emergency room staff is going to fail, and they're not going to be adept at all the things that a hospital can do. Your brain is the same way. You cannot constantly be in an emergency state.
And what you're saying is, although not perceptive danger in an acute sense, not like a predator lurking in the shadows, the chronic stress response the brain is putting out unconsciously is stressing out the physiology and potentially catalyzing a pathway to accelerate illness or
Yeah.
dis-ease or imbalance.
Yeah, and even our discussion earlier about the hormones, the constant signaling of adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, is elevated times 10 in people who are sensitive to this kind of frequency. So you're constantly sending messages from your pituitary down to your adrenals, hey, we're being attacked by the lion.
Mm.
You cannot sustain that without wearing out your adrenals and your pituitary.
So this is why certain information sources suggest being mindful of things like exposure to Wi-Fi or how much time you spend on a bidirectional microwave emitting device like a phone, like a computer, or even the kinds of light frequencies you're exposing your body to. Because again, it's a non-physical thing in terms of you can't grab a light photon. Well, I mean, you are made of light photons, but you can't hold on to them like you can, a solid appearing object, nor can you hear, and I say hear with air quotes, the 5 billion 5G, like you can say music coming out of a speaker because it's not in the range that our senses can pick up as one of the five. But just because you're not consciously perceiving it does not mean that it's not potentially negatively influencing the overall health status of your body.
Correct. Yeah. And, we can't see or hold gravity, but we sure know it affects us. And so this is just, we have to acknowledge the idea that anything affects the body, and we are nothing but antennas. If going back to James Oshman, he spends a huge amount of time explaining how even our fascia, the connective tissue of our body, is nothing more than a big antenna and information relay. So it's just every bit of information that comes into your system is analyzed and dealt with. Now, the body is very good at saying, well, gee, I don't like that. So I'm going to build up a barrier to it. So, for example, there's a number of electrical devices out there that, like these infrared pads or whatever, that are proposing the idea of leaving something on the body for an extended period of time. Magnets, that are in people's insoles and things like this. The body will build up an electrical barrier to to the electricity that's out of normal range, something that has been determined to be detrimental to the body. The body built up an ionic barrier of negative ions to say, no, we're not going to let that in anymore. So, for example, that magnet on your skin might be beneficial for the first, say, 10, 20 minutes. After that, it actually causes the body to have to shift its electricity to defend itself against it.
Mhm.
So, the idea of this is you have to be able to understand that, what is a human being geared for? We're out to be, we're to be in nature. We're supposed to be walking around with natural materials that we're walking on, either are just our bare feet or some version of like leather. And that's supposed to be touching the ground, which is constantly diffusing out the electricity. It's draining the static off of us. And it sounds really corny. One of my therapies for people is to have them go hug a tree. If you, though, examine a tree, it has very deep roots that go way down to the ground. There's nothing better at discharging static electricity out of your body than being in contact with the tree. It's like, in the wintertime, you rub your feet on the carpet and you go touch a doorknob and it goes zit. Well, that's effectively
Discharging
what this
static
tree
electricity.
tree disengagement is. I mean, it's literally capable. But how many people actually touch the ground on a daily basis? How many people can say that their bare feet touch the ground every day? It's actually becoming a rarity.
I'm putting my hand up, no one can see because I've actually tried to construct my life where if I have to wear shoes, that's a potentially bad day for me because I'm literally, but it's funny, I've got into the idea of the kinds of clothing that I wear. The natural fibers have an energetically amplifying effect in the biofield of the body versus the average person walking around in their Lululemon things with these lycra but you're laughing. It's these fabrics do not help the body
Hmm.
operate more beneficially. They're actually detrimental to the body. Natural fibers have been long held tradition for two reasons. One, they've always been available. And two, there was a knowledge of things. And the other aspect is yes, we're supposed to be negatively charged beings. So when you ground out, you're grounding out the positive accumulation of charge, which, I know it's a little simplistic, but to me, inflammation is an accumulation of positive charge in the body. You need to ground that stuff out so you can actually become in the positive contacts negative again, right? You want to be negatively charged is good in this. The only time we're negative is actually a positive connotation. And you are so correct. So many people live an insulated indoor life. They're kind of like a zoo animal. And this is why that layered with the accumulation of exposure to electronic devices, to Wi-Fi. I mean, all you have to do is if you live in a condo, pull up your phone, open your Wi-Fi settings on your phone, look at how many routers you can connect to,
Hmm.
and that is bombarding you all hours of the day. And I do have my own anecdotal experience where when I have to be on electronics more, I have shorter attention span. I want to distract myself more readily. It's like there's a program that my body's taken on, which is, I think, its way of helping to manage and discharge the excitatory accumulation of energy by just engaging a stress response all the time and playing with the neurochemistry in the brain. So I want to thank you for going into that stuff because a lot of people in the West still kind of turn up their nose at the idea of, oh, yeah, you're mitigating Wi-Fi or you're blocking light frequencies or you have a device in your house that helps to harmonize the energy of the home. It's like, well, yeah, because everything we're doing, we're trying to replicate nature. And to your point about uh, touching a tree, to me, all I have to think about was the interconnected relationship of a human and a tree. One breathes out the exhale of the other. It's a cycle. Like they're here to be part of this whole interconnected existence with us. So there's no reason as to say if I have too much accumulated electricity, if I can ground it out to the tree, its roots bring it back into the earth, or the earth can transmute it, then the cycle is complete and my health is better. The tree's health, hopefully, is better. They may be thanklessly doing this job for us, just like pets do. But I want to, yeah, I'm so grateful that we got to go into this stuff and we explained it from a very science first, yet open perspective of just discussing things that are still being elucidated day by day. Like we know far less than we think we do, but we feel like we have ownership of far more than has ever been contextually disproven, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and just one quick note, we sit on our computers in a Zoom meeting.
I
Um,
know. The irony
yeah,
is not lost on me.
there's a little
Indoors.
irony there, but yeah, there's actually um, there was a decision made effectively by one person that the screens that we're looking at are as acknowledged that these are harmful to us. But there was a choice otherwise, and I would direct people to Dr. Jack Kruse, Kruse, who has done a huge amount of information. He's got lots of videos online. How there was a decision-making process that went into, well, what frequency are we going to have these screens operate at? And the most harmful one was chosen.
Yep.
It could have been otherwise. So it's as if there's and I hate to I don't, go down the conspiracy pathway, but it's almost as if somebody wants us to not be well by all the choices that are made that affect the masses of people. So there's things that could be done that you, the individual, to avoid those circumstances or mitigate those circumstances. And yes, you might seem like the cuckoo nut job who's, wearing a tinfoil hat to some people, but you know what? You're going to live longer than they will.
You know, you can just simply line your baseball hat with tin foil so it's
There you go.
invisible to the eye, but you're feeling protected. But in all seriousness, that's why Master Supplements is partnered with a brand like Kedron. We have circadian rhythm optimizing glasses, so the blue light on the screen that you talked about is only a problem if it actually is received by the eye and processed by the brain. So you can wear eye protection to block the absorption of said frequencies. Same thing with the harmonization and mitigation of electromagnetic smog, sustaining your body's own energy field with different crystals and various things. It sounds crazy, but crystals have their own consciousness. They emit frequency all times. As you know, you create pressure in a crystal, it creates a piezoelectric effect. So there's something happening simply by applying force to a seemingly inanimate structure. So I'm glad we got to talk about that. So hopefully we can open some people's eyes and hearts to thinking about things outside simply the world of biochemistry. Jeff, we could do this for hours. I so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, but I do have to round out today's episode. The last thing I do want to ask you is I'm sure people listening are very interested in everything you've had to say and more. Where can people find more about you, or maybe some of the courses that you referenced, or some of the resources that you were talking about?
Sure. Well, I run Whole Life Clinic in Rosemont, Minnesota, so wholelifeclinic.com. Been doing that for 25 years now. So I'm a practitioner as far as that goes. But more recently, over the last 7 years, running an organization called the International Holistic Health Alliance, the IHHA. We do offer a naturopathic doctor degree. We also offer non-degree certification courses in herbs, essential oils, nutrition, and homeopathy. And we also have just some good, courses that are more CEU type courses for the professional who does need their continuing education hours. So you could find that at myihha.org. And we do have our spring event coming up at the Mall of America, of all places. In April 10th and 11th, I'm teaching on the 9th. I'm also teaching a course for practitioners known as the Autoimmune Checklist, how to evaluate, treat, and maintain the health of an autoimmune patient. So there's a lot of stuff I'm doing there. The IHHA, though, is kind of the more recent, fun, exciting, cool stuff.
Yes, and I can say that's something I'm also part of, graciously invited by you and the other founding members, and it's something I'm very much in support of because I've seen what you guys are doing, and I incredibly believe in what it's going to do for the health industry as a whole.
Very good. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Roland. We need to talk. We could talk daily if we really wanted to. We could keep on getting farther and farther into cool stuff. So
Well, we
I
kind of
appreciate you
do, just
inviting me.
not on recordings. But it's been absolutely great to have you
Yeah, some
here.
stuff not for public consumption.
Exactly. Not yet, at least. But yes, Jeff, thank you very much. And to all who listened today, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your continued support. And we'll see you next time on the Following Your Gut podcast.